What kind of media coverage does AD have?
So AD gets a lot of coverage in the trade press, so in waste management magazines and renewable energy magazines, but it struggles to get much coverage beyond trade press. So getting AD into the local news or national news is much harder. Sometimes there are stories in the local news, but they might not always be favourable to AD, so they might cover local opposition to an AD plant, for example. That can be quite newsworthy for local press. And at the national level, it's quite hard to get national coverage about AD as it's quite a complicated technology and it's not very well known in the public domain at the moment.
How is it possible to change the narrative around AD so that the general public and the media see its benefits?
So I think the first thing to say is that AD has so much to offer, and that in many respects that gives us a lot of opportunities to talk about the different things that it can do and the different benefits that it can have for local communities, but also at the national level. So I think it's really important to focus on those good news stories and really think about how we can talk about AD in such a way that people will be able to engage with it. So it's really important to make AD accessible and make it understandable for people who aren't already familiar with it.
What are the tools for doing this?
So I think it's really about, in many respects, the stories are already there. It's just a case of telling them in a creative way and in innovative ways. So thinking about how you can talk about what can be quite a technical process involving, wastes which aren't very glamorous, but kind of talking about them in a different way that where people will find it interesting and see how it impacts on their daily lives.
Can you make some concrete and positive examples?
Yep, so I can think of the example of in Bristol in the UK. A few years ago they had a scheme of poo-powered buses. So these were some buses that ran on biomethane produced from anaerobic digestion, and they were marketed in such a way as to make them kind of fun for people who would ride the buses. So on the side of the buses you had where you could see each of the passengers sat at the window. There was a picture of a passenger sat on a toilet, and that, so kind of getting across the message that actually the bus was powered from people's poo, and that had real success in getting good media coverage because it made it easy to understand, it made it fun, and it was a really good example of how to tell an interesting story, an engaging story about AD.
So can be engaging people a good strategy?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's right. I think it's really important, especially for people who aren't already familiar with anaerobic digestion. I think really trying to think about what they will find interesting and how, the kind of things that will make them take an interest in AD and see how it's relevant to their lives. I think that's the best way of engaging people.
How is it possible to engage people who are not familiar with AD?
So I think one way of doing that is thinking about different channels and different media through which you can engage people with AD. So one good example in the UK is that there's been a television programme recently by a famous TV chef called Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall, and he's done a programme on waste, basically, and how everyday people can reduce the amount of waste in their household. So part of this was about food waste, for example, and showing people how much they waste and how they can, try to reduce that waste. And that was a great example of kind of a well-known TV chef actually kind of taking on these issues and really thinking about how you can speak to people in a very accessible way and very much on people's level to see how you can engage them with waste management.